Finance Committee. I will call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. It's Wednesday, February 21, 2024. We are holding a hybrid meeting. Carol Fischetti and Barry Kaufman will be arriving later. Present from the Finance Committee on Zoom are myself, Louise Miller, and Paul O'Connor. Present in person are Jim Healy, Josh Levy, John Connolly, and Karen Kelton. All votes will have to be by roll call today. And I think that's it. Are there any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee? Do you see any in the room?
Nobody
No.
in the room, nobody online.
All right. Approval of minutes of prior meetings. I don't know if anybody's ready to approve any prior meeting. I know I received some notes back on some of the minutes that were circulated. Any comments?
I think I would wait, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. Do we have the Community Preservation Committee available?
You.
Yes?
Yes, they're coming.
Madam Chair, I met with Joe Barnes, Laura Dorfman, and Lauren Spinney on February 16th. And so I'm happy to give a brief introduction on each of the articles, and then we can have some back and forth discussion. Is that okay?
That's fine. Thank you, Josh.
Okay. So the reserve article is largely unchanged from prior years, reserving 11% for the open space reserve, 11% for the other reserve, except for housing, which is 22%, and that's consistent with prior years. The $82,000 administrative budget is unchanged from prior years. The one thing of note is that in the current year, much of that money is being used for a consultant to help specifically with due diligence on the Linden Chambers redevelopment project, the Linden redevelopment project. You want to talk about that briefly, that article? We can do that and then move on to Linden.
And I just to if I may, so this is the annual consultation with the Community Preservation Committee. This is in advance of the public hearing. If you could let us know when your public hearing will be, and then if we talk very briefly about each article and where the Community Preservation Committee is with respect to those articles. Thank you.
Sure. Our public hearing is going to be held on March 13th at 7 p.m. It's going to be at PSAB in the Charles River Room. And if you'd like us to speak to the appropriations to the funds, should we talk about Dave's memo?
Yeah, so I can talk to you quickly about the appropriations. Kind of as Josh said, that the historic or the open space, we're doing 11%. Community housing, the committee has decided to do 22%. They have done that in the past few years. That meets the 10% requirement, and then the historic reserves the 11% or 10% requirement, but 11% is our practice, is being met through our debt service payments.
And that's for the town,
For
town
the,
hall and Emmy Broker.
and yes,
Did members of the committee have questions about that?
I don't have any questions.
No.
Madam Chair, Josh, anybody?
So I'm guessing that the meatiest one is about Linden. That's what we spent the most time about in our discussion. And it wasn't really about the value, because I think everyone is really understanding of the value of the project. Is really about the risks and how to mitigate against those risks. As I mentioned before, the CPC has retained a consultant to do its own due diligence of the NHA application, making sure that everything is in line and really set up for success. The request for $5.5 million would be used to partially fund the construction And in particular, to hopefully secure outside funding sources, there are 14 proposed funding sources in total. In, and I guess I'll just name some of the things we discussed. These, I describe them as risks. I hope that they can be overcome. I mean, I think that's the intent. From short to long term, first is, the Cambridge Housing Authority is the plan development consultant. And we discussed that there's still no contract in place between the Cambridge Housing Authority and the Needham Housing Authority. That is in part due to, the Cambridge Housing Authority having, gone through a change of general counsel. That is, I believe, expected the end of March. The outside funding will probably take 1 to 2 years at the minimum. It could take longer to secure. That's because these are competitive funding sources, and it may take multiple rounds of applications to be approved. As a complication, the Seabeds and Cooks project is also applying for some of the same outside funding sources. And there's a dependency between Seabeds, Cook and Linden. So specifically, the Needham Housing Authority is looking to do an equity takeout of the Seabeds Cook to fund the Linden project. So they have to secure the funds for the Seabeds Cook, then the Linden has to have, funding has to be secured.
May I just?
Yeah.
Interject in it? Though it may seem like a complication, it actually could actually be a good thing, because then with 2 projects presented, it makes a stronger case for the request for the funding.
From the outside agencies, right? So they'll be able to both of them at the same time. Okay.
I'm not sure if it's at the same time, but they'll see one and then they'll see the other,
Yeah.
and then we'll see them both together.
Okay, thank you. And then we discussed the disbursement of funds. So the 5.5 million would be dispersed contingent on particular milestones and progress made on the project. There was a suggestion that maybe it could be in some sense limited. I don't know if we discussed the parameters in some way. But, you know, waiting for the funds to be secured, and if it wasn't secured in a certain amount of time, then.
We'd be looking at progress, some progress being made before we would start the disbursement.
Okay,
And there is an inherent protection for the town in our disbursement process already that exists, that has existed since before the housing authority brought this, which is we don't provide them with the money up front. We hold it basically aside, and then they have to provide us proof of completion of either the entire project, a portion of the project, obviously depends on the size of it. Complete with invoices that then get vetted by myself and Lauren, that get vetted by the town accountant, that we have to sign off on, and then in the case of the housing authority, the TCHOP committee also signs off on. So they're not getting the money until they've actually completed the work, even if they've secured the other funding sources.
It-
Can I just interrupt? Do you have an agreement then with whoever the grantee is? And if you have a written agreement, it would be helpful if we could see a copy of whatever the form is that is being used.
Yeah, we have grant agreements when they get approved, so we don't have one yet for this specific 5.5 million request, but we have ones for the previous request that I can share, and then I can also share the forms that they submit.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Is there a limited amount of time in which they are available to submit reimbursement?
So the grant agreement does usually have a time frame for the project. It's typically 1 to 2 years, depending on the projects. That obviously wouldn't be reasonable for this, so we would work with the housing authority on an appropriate timeline for the contract.
And then I think the last thing we mentioned, that there still may be a possibility that another funding cycle would be needed beyond this one.
And what would that be for, Josh? Or Joe?
Well, I think due to the competitiveness of the grants, they may not get it in the first round. So they may be reapplying, and so we may have to delay the awarding of the disbursement of funds.
Well,
until they get-
I just heard the other way, that they might need more than 5.5 at some point in time if the other funds aren't available or secured. Did I hear that wrong? Is that what?
Well, not necessarily for this phase. So Linden is part of, there's the Linden project and the Chambers project. And what the NHA has done is kind of bifurcate
Right.
this into Linden phases 1A and 1B, and Chambers being phase 2. So I think we do anticipate at some point down the road receiving requests for funds to contribute towards phase two, which would be the chambers redevelopment.
Which would be above and beyond this 5.5.
Yes, that would be.
And is that earmarked in any sort of budget? Not that you would have it, but have they told you, sort of given you a pro forma of, would it be a similar request at 5.5 or maybe more or less?
I don't think we've gotten into that.
The last they brought to us, and this was probably a year ago, it was about the same amount. It was between 4 and 6 million. But it was a rough estimate. It was from a couple of years ago and that's been pushed out. So it was originally slated as a request for, I think, 26, and then they're saying it's probably not gonna be until 27, 28. So it's kind of a moving target.
Right, but aren't some of the costs that are being incurred now, for example, legal for the zoning and other things, are for the entire project, so there wouldn't be a duplication of certain of the expenses that have been incurred or are being incurred now because they're part of permitting the entire 2 phases.
I believe that's
Correct in that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there are two, well, I think in addition to this article, there's a zoning article at town meeting to enable the project.
Yeah.
And then also an article about deeds, removing restrictions on some of the deeds. Both of those, I assume, are required for this project to
Yeah.
move forward.
Yep.
Did I miss anything in summary?
No.
I just had a question, and it has to do with, the development fee that gets paid. I need to get educated on it. How is it derived at? Is it a percentage of something? And if it is a percentage of something, what is it that it's a percentage of? That's one of my questions. The second question is, it seems like we're paying the Cambridge Housing Authority now on a basis for work that they're performing. It would seem to me that if we're paying them for the sort of pre-development work that they're doing now, shouldn't that be part of or carved out of the development fee? Because it seems like they're almost, I'm not using this in the right way, but sort of double dipping. In the sense that they're getting paid up front now, and then they're also getting a pretty large development fee. And then my third question is, who does that development fee go to? Does that go to the Cambridge Housing Authority so they can use our money to build more things in Cambridge? I'm just perplexed by it and need to find out. And maybe you can direct me where I can get educated on it, because that's the part that really I struggle with in this whole thing. I'm all in favor of this project. I want this project to get done. That's the part that is, I'm having a hard time putting my arms around. So I'm just making it more of a comment but that's what my comment and concerns are.
Sure. Well, I think, these are probably questions that are maybe more appropriately answered by the NHA with respect to how that.
So I guess have you asked these, or will you guys be asking these as part of your process?
Now, sure, yes.
Well, we will,
Yeah.
but I also believe our consultant has made queries kind of about that development fee, what's been paid and when, and we're receiving a presentation from her tonight. So it could very well be information that she'll touch on.
Right, so I understand paying them as their consultant right now, and they're advising us on how to do these things, because they've done these projects all around. I get all that part, but the kicker part is the part that is the part that I think, at least for me, I just need to be more educated on it.
Well, we can make a note of
Yeah,
that and
I'd
explore it
appreciate
and
that.
circle back.
Thank you.
And I'd like to, I'm sorry, I'd like to follow up with, on John's question regarding the grants. I think we need to understand what happens if the grants are not obtained on the timeline that the Housing Authority has presented. I don't think it's just a matter of applying the following year. So if we could get clarification on that. And I'm sorry, I think I interrupted someone. Did someone else have a question?
I did.
Yeah, Mr.
All right.
Billy did.
So,
Mr.
couple of comments. Who is negotiating on behalf of the housing authority with the contract, which has not yet been entered into with the Cambridge Housing Authority?
We have council.
I believe it's their council,
Who's counsel?
NHA.
Who is it?
I think.
Oh.
Bob Smart, isn't it? Bob Smart.
And the problem that I've had on this whole project from the time that I first heard about it is not that I didn't want to get it done, because I think it's probably as compelling a need as anyone that we have in the town. But that when you talked about, Cecilia, the invoices and how they're presented and that, you know, they don't get paid until there's, you know, records that back it up. Who's doing the inspections? In other words, how is it that we confirm that the money that's now being requested in the invoices actually represents work that has been done in good workmanlike fashion? See, here's what I have, and I spoke about it last year, so this isn't a new thought. When the Permanent Public Building Committee goes out and works on a project for the town of Needham, we hire a Needham employee from the DPW to assist in those efforts. So we know in town, our people are working on these projects. There's project managers, they're there on site, they know what's going on, and if there's a problem, they report it. What I can't get my hands around is who is that person that's representing the town of Needham? Because these monies are the town of Needham's monies. They're funds that are taken by our taxpayer. But who is being the watchdog for those monies?
So they're kind of a two-part answer. The first part is, they do sign, you know, stating on the reimbursement that they're not lying. Under perjury, which I know isn't proof necessarily, but it is something.
Over that
And then the other one is, this is a huge part of why we brought together the TCHOC committee, is so that they could provide that sort of, not as intense as PVBC, I would say, oversight, but some form of oversight, checking in with them. If they have questions, that is the opportunity definitely to kind of provide that kind of in between.
Well, what's their expertise, the Chief Chalk Committee?
Well, it's a
Very-
matter, I'm on it, not that I have any expertise.
But
but-
is it just a group of
Yeah.
town citizens?
Correct.
So what I had suggested last year, John, and you know this world much better than I do. Why isn't part of this project? Why don't we hire someone? Why doesn't the town of Needham hire someone as the protector of these $5.5 million?
So I think that one of the, I don't disagree with the concept, I think one of the challenges is, it's. And these terms, easier to do that when those monies are all going to construction and you can actually go and have someone who looks and says, yes, that wall went up according, and this is the plan that says the wall goes there and then the wall is there. And so you can do those things. That's an easy process to do. A lot of this 5.5, as I understand, it's not really going to construction, but it's going to, pre-development things, some planning, some of the architects things and things along those lines. So it's not it's a more difficult process to follow, at least as I understand it, because it's not like just going to $5.5 million into a $20 million building. It's 5.5 going towards a lot of different things, and that it's harder to track that way. It can be tracked. I think part of TCHOC's responsibility or goal is to track it and ask those questions.
So
but-
does the
but there's no-
TCHOC, does it have the same
It doesn't have any funding.
competencies? But does it have the same competencies, let's say, as the PVPC? Because I'm assuming, I mean, you were the chair of that committee. So they had architectural drawings would come in to the PVPC, and I'm assuming that your committee back then in the day, and I'm assuming now.
And now that they're doing that, they're starting to do that. So there's like almost meetings once a month, and it's anticipated that were this to go forward, they would be even more accelerated and more in depth.
John, can I just, I'm so sorry.
No, I was gonna ask you to clarify some of the uses of the 5.5 million.
Yeah, I did just want to clarify, because the pre-development costs that you're talking about, was a previous grant that the CPC awarded for 1.386 million. And that is the money that has gone towards pre-development costs. The 5.5 is supposed to be intended solely for construction. My understanding, the NHA has proposed, I don't know that this is final, but in some of their responses to some of the questions that the CPC put forth, they proposed using 500,000 for closing costs, and then the rest would be billed monthly towards construction costs as they're incurred.
Yeah, so
So it's
potentially
actually
then
two
that
grand.
5 million that we're authorizing now might not get spent until 2 or 3 years from now.
That's right.
So there's gonna be a place to track that when it gets to that point.
And if I may, also, the other 14 funding sources will be very closely monitoring how their funds are being used. And I'm sure, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I bet we could get information on their inspections and their reports. I would think that would be part of this project moving forward.
The only thing I just want to point out, and I know history never really does repeat itself. But the reason the PVVC was formed was because of the Pollard project. And the Inspector General came to this town and said, you guys better figure out a better way to run your construction projects. And because what we did is we ended up paying contractor $1.5 million twice. And it was a big deal. And there's a big Inspector General report. I think you can still get it if you Google it. And so that's, I guess that since I lived through it, because I was on the finance committee, I was the chair at the time that happened. So I guess it's just because I was there at the time I just want to make sure we're not repeating ourselves in terms of this, these monies. The 14 funding sources totaling, how much money do you think you're going to be able to get out of those sources?
It's 83 million?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The estimated total cost is 83,864,739 as of the last information we received.
Okay, so 83, I just want to make sure, is that plus the 5 or?
Inclusive of the 5.
Okay, so these funding sources would actually be 83 less than 5.5,
Oh, excuse me, yes.
yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And to go back to a previous question, it is something that I think the committee has talked about. I know we've been looking at ways to determine if they don't, or if they are not successful in the first round of funding and they do need to go back a second year. Figuring out a timeline when it is reasonable to hold on to this money with the expectation that it may take them a couple of times versus when it is, we should, close out the contract and ask them to come back in front of the committee in case that is something that, so we're not holding it on for, let's say it's 10 years down the road and they haven't received funding versus 2 years and they haven't received funding. So that is something we're kind of trying to figure out how to address.
I think it's fair to say also, it's a very competitive atmosphere out there. We're by no means the only town that's looking for funding. There is going to be a real, there's a high expectation will be funded this round, but more likely it's going to be a following cycle. So we're prepared for that. I think the housing authority is as well, but we'll see what happens.
So Joe, and your group entirely, the grant agreement that you enter into with the NHA, I think is gonna be complicated.
Yes.
Because to the points which the good points you just raised about phasing and not getting the money until all these contingencies basically have occurred until you do it. Are you guys gonna have council help you with that? Because I think-
Absolutely.
I would advise that you do, and then, is it town council, or are you gonna get separate council, or how, what's,
Kind of see town council
Yeah.
now.
He has helped us in the past with the previous grant agreements, which have become more, I'll say the grant agreement with the Needham Housing Authority definitely looks different than the grant agreement with the Needham Community Farm from 2 years ago.
I think it's fair to say,
Well,
Joe,
that's not 83 million.
no, I mean, that's gonna be a really important
Yeah.
document,
Yeah.
and, I'm glad to hear that you're gonna be taking advantage of those resources.
you use the word complicated. That's an understatement. Tennis courts at the high school. We can do that without any trouble. And
Fencing.
fencing around, we're into that. This is very, very challenging. Yeah, so we'll be on it. We'll keep an eye.
The health consultant's great that does this for a living, so he's really not.
John, I have a feeling that's making a lot of work for you in the future.
There's a lot of other stuff out there, but it'll be fun.
Now, what tell me again, because I should have known, but I didn't know. Chalk?
Yeah.
And what does it mean?
It's a
Town-
strange acronym, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Town Finance Community Housing Oversight Committee. I have to pull it up. I just don't.
Town Finance Committee.
Community Housing Oversight Committee.
Geez, that's great.
See, I thought I saw
Where's the
it.
F? Where's the F?
I know, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
The F might
It's a hyphen.
sound a little different.
Just having that.
Like Native American.
Tim, we can get you on that committee if you'd like.
No, I got the, yeah.
You got that thing?
Any other questions from the committee regarding the Linden Street redevelopment?
I don't have any.
Okay, so let's move on to the high school tennis courts and the DeFazio complex fencing.
Absolutely. So the tennis courts, the total project cost is a little over $2.5 million. 1.44 million is requested from the CPC. The time of construction would be this summer with completion for the next sports season. And this would be to rehabilitate the 4 existing courts and then add 4 new courts on top of it. The remaining funding sources from the town side is proposed to be $1 million from the athletic improvement fund, some $150,000 overlay surplus, and then about $10,000 from prior town meeting warrant articles. So, do you want to discuss that more detail?
So we're going from 4 courts to 8 courts?
Yes.
So where are we getting the land for the new 4 new courts?
They walked us through this. It's, if you're looking at the, parking lot beyond heading toward Rosemary, there's space for,
Where that grass area
yes,
is?
yes. With enough space between the existing 4 and the new 4. You almost have to be there to see that yes, there is plenty of space for it.
Okay,
Doesn't
so
take
they're
up
gonna
any-
be, because if you're walking at the 4 existing courts.
Yep.
This would be to the kind of jiggered to the left.
To the
at
left,
end over
right,
there, okay.
Right. It doesn't impact parking, doesn't impact the neighbors much, although there's gonna be some discussion to be sure that they're on board since they are getting closer to that area. They needed more than 4 for a tennis tournament. Each tennis tournament match or need them against other town. Five competitions, 3 singles, 2 doubles, and most of the time now, most towns have at least 5 courts. Now with only 4 courts, another doubles team has to wait until someone gets off, just isn't efficient at all. They get a great deal of use by the town as well. So it sounded like a good plan. When Stacy took us through it and walked us the area.
And, did they present anything to you on, have they thought about the funding they're gonna need and the resources they're gonna need to maintain these, so that we don't, kind of got to the situation where we were, where we built them and then they went downhill pretty quickly due
That
to,
question was raised more than once.
and what was the answer?
The answer was yes, they will be building into their budget, maintenance. But I think that the important piece here is that the construction on the new courts and the existing will be, what is it again? What's the term?
Post-tension. concrete.
Post-tension concrete, which has a 25-year a warranty. Possibly longer if they're maintained well, versus regular asphalt, which is 3 to 5. So we felt comfortable with the request.
And then I guess my final question, I don't mean to monopolize this, but was there any discussion about use of these courts for pickle?
Yes,
And what was the result of that
absolutely.
discussion?
That came up last year by me. No, pickleball will not be played there. This is competitive tennis that the high school kids play. Additional lines on the court will be a distraction. The high school athletic department feels the same way. They don't want any interference. It'll be tennis courts only.
Are these courts proposed to be used only by students or by the public as well?
No, public as well.
I think that actually makes sense. I mean, that is a competitive high school sport,
Mhm.
boys and girls, and there are other courts, I think, that probably the town needs to take a look at, Park and Rec, you know.
Well, this would free up Mills, for example, right?
It will, yeah. And Newman as well.
Because the public obviously is getting 4 more, even though the high school might only be getting the 8 they need or the 6 they need. But when the public uses them, those are 4 extra courts now.
Correct.
So I agree with it. I support it. Also because I know that John Bullion never saw a tennis project he didn't like. So I'm gonna give my old colleague a little boost.
Just
Madam-
2 questions. So one is when you present the article, put your materials together, can you be very clear on the maintenance versus new portion of the project and what CPC is agreeing to use CPA funds for, since we cannot use funds for maintenance. And this came up when the project was discussed previously with the finance committee. And then my second question has to do is that the area where Ultimate Frisbee was played or is being played? Are they relocating Ultimate Frisbee? You don't ask
We've
that,
not
okay,
had that conversation.
okay. Cause I know that, that area back there, there was actually an Ultimate Frisbee field past the, parking lots behind where the tennis courts are. So I'd just be curious to know what they're doing.
We can ask that question and circle back.
Thank you. All right, last one, DeFazio.
Madam
Wait,
Chair.
can I
Oh,
ask-
did-
can I ask a question?
Sorry.
Thanks. Quick question. So do you guys have comparisons that sort of justifies the expense or shows that this cost is a reasonable cost for these courts? That's one question. The second question is, Josh, I think you said $1 million is coming from the athletic fund. Is there going to be, my recollection is that fund doesn't have that much money at the moment. Is that going to be an allocation as part of this warrant to the fund for this purpose?
I think there would be I think there's sufficient funding currently for this purpose.
Okay,
but Another warrant article that could potentially be used to fund, but again, I don't know if there's a plan to put money into the athletic improvement fund.
There is the annual contribution to the fund is zero. It's down.
That's from fees, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
With respect to justification of the cost, the CPC did receive from Park and Rec cost comparison for not only the number of courts, 4 versus 6 versus 8, but also looking at the cost for constructing it in asphalt versus the post-tension concrete. So we did have discussions with them about all of the various configurations and options. They made a fairly, I think, compelling argument about the longevity of the post-tension concrete, how that particular construction material is far more durable and will have a much longer lifespan. In addition to the fact that the warranty for it they will warranty it for 25 years, where the asphalt will only be warranted for a very short amount of time. Is it 1 to 3 years, I think? And also, the Park and Recreation Committee has itself voted for and approved that it is their desire to have the 8 courts and the post-tension concrete, so that they've kind of cleared that through their own committee.
I received a phone a friend, and they've relocated where they do Ultimate Frisbee.
should we anticipate, I guess, funding for this technology at the other tennis courts, whether it's Newman or Mills in the future?
You know, right.
Yeah, I don't think that's a question we've asked. We don't know that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I guess one last question for Dave, is this the planned funding or allocations to the athletic fund, you know, in anticipation of ultimately replacing the turf again when it's time's up? Is that this doesn't interfere with that? Is that safe to say?
It does not.
Okay. Thanks.
The last
One.
article is on the fencing. This is for $417,000 at the Fazio. It would be around the periphery of the field, the track and the baseball diamond. It does not include the top lots. And the timing for construction would be late summer and early fall of 2024. I think this is the simplest one. They're
So-
missing-
Assuming the fencing just needs to be replaced, right?
That's all. That's all. Yeah.
So
What
it's
does-
replace
Can I,
fencing as opposed to putting fencing in areas where it doesn't exist right now.
Correct.
I'm in favor of new fencing.
Well, Ed Olson took us around and showed the need, and it was compelling, so. Safety is an issue as well as the aesthetic of it.
Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
I did look it up. So they eliminate the app. That's what they do.
Yes.
Town finance, community housing oversight committee. So it's the hyphen that does it.
It doesn't, happens to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
Maybe Rick one more on that committee too.
Oh, appreciate you. What?
You should just put them on there just to punish him.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry, Lauren had to go start the CPC meeting.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, we'll go to that now.
Madam Chair, are you still there?
I am still here. I am going to leave the meeting and get back in. Can you guys see me?
You can hear me, we cannot
No.
see you.
No, yeah, I think I need to leave the meeting and come back in. Something weird has happened.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Carol just joined us.
But that's not something.
Tapping out.
Yeah,
Yeah, really.
Oh, I think the attendees.
Dave's in control.
Don't let her in.
Allowed to talk, no.
Okay, I am back. And just couldn't see me didn't mean I couldn't hear you, you know.
Oh.
Oh, okay. All right, so next we are continuing the Finance Committee discussion and vote on the FY 2025 preliminary budget recommendations. Where we ended at the last meeting was with respect to additional positions that were being requested and recommended for funding in various way by the town manager. Town manager and I met shortly after the meeting. She did send a memo to my attention last Friday. I apologize, I forgot to send it out. I sent it to you all. Was it this morning or yesterday morning? And hopefully you've had a chance to review it, but basically there was an explanation of the prioritization in terms of townwide prioritization of DSR4s, not just prioritization of DSR4s within each department, and then a way by which positions that were partially being funded would have a sufficient amount of revenue to fund them in the following year. And then there was a little bit of an explanation of the sustainability coordinator, which generated some amount of discussion at our last meeting. So I think what we need to decide now is where we are with respect to the DSR4s, the sustainability coordinator position. John had made a proposal last week for different funding. We had some discussion about that, and I'd like us to start there with the DPW budget. So comments from the committee.
I think there's a proposal to take the land surveys out of the budget and put them as a separate warrant article.
So we had suggested that, I had suggested that we hadn't really discussed it at length. We just talked about it very briefly. I think the comment that was made at our last meeting was that it was unlikely that this would be an ongoing recurring annual need, and that it seems appropriate to continue keeping it as a financial warrant article, that there should be sufficient free cash to cover that expense. which means that we have $100,000 recurring revenue that is available to, for other purposes, should we decide to appropriate it for, other purposes. So that was one. And then the sustainability coordinator, was another item of discussion, as well as the partial funding at DPW of the fleet, assistant supervisor, whatever the title is. That fleet position that was only going to be funded for half a year.
So
Thoughts?
I read through the town manager's memo, and I'm, you know, like, the only question I had, based on what was written, is that on the priority list, sustainability manager is listed in red, but then there's no requested or proposed. I'm sure if I read through this again, I could figure it out, but I couldn't figure it out when I read it about an hour and a half ago. So can I ask the town manager to weigh in on that?
Absolutely.
So what I understood, Louise's question, Jim, was where if the sustainability manager had been a DSR four in FY 25, instead of us having repurposed a position for it in FY 24, where would I have put it on the list? And that's right.
Okay. In the epidemiologist, where does that currently sit in terms of the budget request?
It's a DSR.
So again, I'm sorry if I'm just missing this, but I'm going through this memo and I don't see it. This one, well, yeah.
Well, it's in the ARPA positions, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the ARPA positions
Oh,
that are
so the
added.
HHS ARPA position.
Yeah.
Okay, because I couldn't, I know it was being recommended, but I couldn't see where it was. So how many positions are within the ARPA positions? 4?
Yeah.
Okay,
But they're also
but they're partially
half positions.
funded, right?
For the next
So the
fiscal year.
only, so the only question I had, and I think it's the same one that John had mentioned last time, and I'd just like to get the committee's view on it. Is I can only look at this from, my limited experience. And, I'm not in health and human services. But I agree with what John said last week. And I think that if we're trying to allocate budget dollars, I would rather allocate it for personnel that are directly going to be helping the citizens of the town. That's not to suggest that the epidemiologist at some point will generate research and data that arguably will benefit the citizenry. But to me, that's not as much of a priority as, putting people in front of either our youth or our seniors. So if I was to prioritize those, I would not have had the epidemiologist at the top, and instead I would have recommended funding the other people that I believe are having more direct involvement and direct impact.
That was what I said, and I agree, I'm in full agreement with that.
But
But I don't understand why we're, we're doing it. My concern is that because there isn't, another such position there, it's not like we can sort of trade off and say, I would rather have another public facing person, or persons, for youth and seniors. Instead of the epidemiologist, we don't have that alternative. We only have the epidemiologist, and my fear I don't want to be in a position next year where we have that position funded and now we're have the request for the direct person, and I wish I would have that opportunity to do that now as opposed to next year when we already have the epidemiologist in place. That's what my concern is.
So John, I think we do have a DSR for a request for, Council on Aging for direct services.
We do. And I'm in favor of that. I'm just saying, if I had my druthers, I'd rather have another DSR four for another position like that as opposed to a DSR four. Because I expect we're gonna get one of those. And, either, next year or the year after, and we're sort of handcuffed by having, if we have this position go forward. Without having that choice right now.
Understood.
I think the epidemiologist has a lot of value. I mean, I think there are different types of roles, like some roles are clinical, some roles are informational. Not all health roles have to be patient facing, I guess. So I guess I don't
But
understand.
that's not the argument.
Yeah, okay.
The argument is, I think that for me, and it's just my own personal view, is that I think that if I think that the most value to directly benefit our youth and seniors would be front-facing positions and counseling roles. As opposed to a collection of data. I'm not meaning in a negative way, but I'm just saying as far as directly benefiting our youth and our seniors.
Is it important to have the epidemiologist to kind of justify my understanding is that to assess additional new grant funding, it's valuable to have somebody that can analyze the data, that can really look towards the needs of the town and opine on whether what we really need is two more youth mental health clinicians because of the incidence of depression or whatever. So I thought that it wasn't just pure research based for research purposes. It was to serve, to address a need that's not been addressed.
That was my understanding as well.
So in the proposed budget as revised from the town manager, the HHS CAT front desk that we had expressed an interest in is included,
Yes.
correct? So,
Yes.
so even though it's on this page 3, where it's under the category of not being funded, that was based on the first budget, not the revised.
The page 2 budget.
The town manager
shows-
buys the budget. She's agreeing with the manner in which we would like to revise it. I think fair way to say it.
And that front desk position, I believe, is currently grant funded. But I think it could continue as a grant funded position, is my understanding, unless we wanted to move it into the budget.
I thought it was volunteer funded. Is that not the case?
There's a part-time staff person that supervises the volunteers. There's a group of about 12 volunteers that sort of staff the front desk. And there's a paid person who sort of runs through it on them. That person is currently supported by the formula grant. Executive Office of Elder Affairs provides a formula grant to each community for their seniors. That is subject to appropriation every year, but it is a fairly reliable source of funding.
And if you weren't funding that position with that grant, what would you be doing with the funds?
EOEA formula grant is the most flexible grant I've ever seen. We can buy food, we can buy treadmills, we can hire musicians. It's very flexible.
I apologize.
Is that great?
Go ahead, Barry.
I
Sorry.
was just gonna ask, I was just gonna ask how big that grant has been in the past, and is it a relatively consistent amount?
It has changed. The current amount is $14 per resident, per senior resident. So that equates to about $113,000 and change.
So I apologize, I gotta go backwards. So HHS CAT front desk that we thought was very important. Am I hearing that will be funded anyway? Even if we don't include it in the budget?
The staff has told me it is a priority for them, and I will try to find ways to fund it. One of their requests was to take it out of a grant funded position and make it operating.
But if that didn't happen, what you said, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, that historically it has been on a regular basis funded out of those grant lines. And there's no reason to believe that it would not continue to be funded out of those grant lines.
Subject to appropriation from the legislature, but yes.
Yeah, but the legislature has appropriated that historically for a number of years.
When it gets around to passing the budget, yes.
Okay,
Well-
I'm gonna have to jump in. I'm sorry. That is absolutely not what was said to us at our meeting with Health and Human Services regarding this position. At no point did anyone tell us that this position already existed and someone was sitting in this position being funded by a grant. So is there someone there today who has
There is-
this position?
Sorry.
Yeah, Tim's here today.
Sorry, there is someone in that position. They are grant funded. They were on the org chart that I provided. The org chart didn't distinguish what grant funding source, but it did distinguish all the positions that were grant funded.
So in essence, if it goes as part of the operating budget, this just frees up more money to be used for other purposes of the library.
Yes.
Yeah, as allowed under the grant. So that, it kind of changes my mind. I mean, I think now, and I agree, Madam Chair, and hey, listen, I might have missed it, but I didn't understand that that was the case. Can I also ask we've got a number of emails, which I did, but the rest of it, but from people that are very interested in the HHS budget and basically advocating for one particular position over another. But the mental health counselor, and was that for youth, as I understand it? Okay, so where is that right now? Oh, so that's one of the HHS ARPA positions. So that would be funded under this scenario.
We recommended that, yeah.
Okay, and, all right. Okay,
And from the org chart, there are two other youth mental health commissions that are proposed to be, well, I think we approved their funding through the, not pilot, but the Children's Hospital, host agreements.
right, okay, all right. So can you tell me again then, Tim, what are the ones that are not currently in the proposed budget for HHS? Is it the EHA staffing? Is that one of them?
Yes.
And is the other one the CAT staffing? Assuming, again, back 2 weeks ago, not recently.
My understanding is the town manager's original proposal was the 3.5, 3 full-time, 1 half-time ARPA funded positions. There were 2 other DSR fours, a TAP front desk and environmental health hours.
Yeah.
And that was not something the town manager recommended.
Got it, okay. Okay, well, then I agree with what you said, John, but I'm not sure we have much of a choice. Because my prerogative would be to stick with the ARPA funded positions and not the other DSR fours, and I would not fund the HHS CAT front desk because it's already being paid for by grant funds, and there's no reasonable expectation that it won't be funded by the grants in the future.
But how different from what we do with the library, where the library certain positions through their grants, and after a certain number of years, once it becomes clearly part of their operating budget, they just move to the operating budget.
Yeah.
I tend to agree that this is a position that should be. It should be a full-time position within the budget. I mean, the fact that it's getting, it's benefiting or being able to be funded now from grant funding, I'm not sure should be the driving factor.
Well,
Whether this should be part of.
Sorry, go ahead, Barry.
No, I just don't think that should be the driving factor of whether we think this should be in the budget or not in the budget. If we believe that this is a valid position that should be ongoing within the operating budget.
So I agree in part and disagree in part, and I think it is a compromise, at least in my mind. What part of grant money should we consider to be monies that should be assisting the regular operations of the budget, and what should be extra? And, I, at one point was a liaison to the library way back in the day. I know, Louise, you were too. So I understand the debate, and I guess what I would say is, now that I have heard this most recent explanation tonight, that's how I come out on it. At least for next year. So, Madam Chair, how do we move forward on approval of the budget?
So we need someone, if you would like to, well, I didn't put anything in the finance committee column for DPW, for HHS. I need a motion for us to fund something in either of those, whether they are changes from the town manager's recommendation or no change from the town manager's recommendation. And I think at our last meeting, that's what John had done. And then we asked for more information. So at this point, the question is, do we want to make any changes to the town manager's recommendation?
Madam Chair, I agree with, I think, at least I do, with the recommendations of the town manager and the proposals that are outlined in the email, the letter of February 16th. I agree that we should fund those ARPA positions for the balance of the year. I believe we should take the land surveys out of the budget and put it in, take it out where it is now and put it in, that it be funded in free cash. The only one I don't recommend is the HHS CAT front desk. And I also agree that we should provide the additional funding of $10,000 for the Needham Council for Arts and Culture. So other than that, those are the changes that I would make from the town manager's original proposed budget.
Okay. With respect to those two, DPW and HHS, and then Cultural Council.
Yes.
Okay. There was one other small one, but we can get back to it. So any discussion from other members of the finance committee, agreement, disagreement?
I'm on board with that.
All right.
I would want to see the CAP position funded
Yeah.
as recommended.
I'm with Barry that we do have sufficient funds available to also fund the CAF position. And I think at $14 per senior, $113,000 per year, it would provide additional funding for Council on Aging. Try something different or add to the services that they're currently providing.
And that's what a grant should be for, in my opinion.
Until it no longer becomes a grant and it becomes part of the operating budget.
Well,
Which is what we've been doing.
but that's
our-
okay if it's
We don't
if
always
it's a
do that.
useful, valuable program.
We
right?
don't
I
always
mean-
do that with police and fire, and we all know that, right? So
But
we'll get a grant for extra firefighters, extra police, and what we tell them every time is, this is great for 2 or 3 years, but don't come back in year 4 and say, well, now you're gonna fund it.
Well, we did that with fire.
I think that's my concern. All right, I'm not here to fight City Hall or even Town Hall. So if that's what the majority would like to do, I'm fine with it.
So I guess I'm just gonna ask for a vote of finance committee on whether we take the town manager's proposals for funding all 4 ARPA positions, the CAF position, and additional funding for arts and culture as proposed at our last meeting for $10,000. We would also take the land surveys out of the operating budget and fund them and propose funding them with free cash as a financial warrant article. So
And then the only we have to do is the fleet person. Is that the only other thing, Madam
Then we'll-
Chair?
we'll have the fleet person and an understanding that we're leaving the finance division budget as is. We are going to have a discussion next week regarding IT with both the school department and the town department.
And Madam Chair, one question. So the public health consulting is also becoming a warrant article. Is that correct?
I believe that is a warrant article, yes, so that'll be discussed at another time.
So I would agree with that, and if you'd like, I'll make a motion.
And I
Thank
will
you.
second it. I will second the motion.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, John. All right, I'm going to order of who is on my screen. So Paul,
Madam Chair, we have one point of order here.
Madam Chair, just want to clarify that what you are asking the committee to move also incorporates the reductions to the workers' compensation budget, the Minuteman budget, and the employee benefits budget, and full funding of the fleet superintendent assistant.
So
Right, so it's the
What-
chart.
I was going to
Right.
propose we have one more reduction to the 34,000 that was added to OPEB.
We already reduced that.
Yeah, we eliminated that.
You eliminated that? Okay, so that one's gone. Okay. Okay, that's fine if you want to put it all into one giant motion.
So moved.
Fine with me. Maybe we should eat assistant manager while we're at it.
You cut out, what did you say,
What?
Louise?
We still have the. That's the
Oh.
only then pending question.
Oh, so Louise is asking to make the motion exclusive of the assistant supervisor, I think. I think Louise, you want that as a separate motion? to
I don't think
discuss that.
You're fading out.
I don't think we discussed that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Now,
Why don't we just take the motion that we have with,
I'm
The-
agreeing with that fleet supervisor. So my motion incorporated that.
okay, perfect, incorporated full funding for fiscal year 25 for fleet assistant super. All right,
Yes,
John, that comports with your understanding of the motion you seconded?
yes, it is.
Perfect. So I will move on to the vote. Paul,
Aye.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes,
Carol,
Yes.
yes,
and I vote yes. So I believe it's unanimous.
So we have a
Perfect.
budget.
We have a budget and I will reflect our discussion regarding the addition of positions and our request that changes be brought to the finance committee's attention and that when positions are substantially changed, rather than simply adding or subtracting from duties, they be made through DSR fours. All right,
Madam
we
Chair,
have-
do you want to have motions on the rest of these articles, or is it just for discussion, or what would you like?
no, we would like motions on the rest of the articles, which are, I have to open my,
So we'll start with property tax assistance. The only question is the 50,000 that same amount? For whatever
Yes.
reason, I thought it was 40, but is 50 the same amount?
Yes.
50.
So I make a motion that we recommend adoption of the article for Needham Property Tax Assistance Program.
Second,
Okay, I will take a roll call vote. Paul,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That's unanimous. All
Now,
right,
The next one is the small repair grant program, and again, the same question, is that the same amount, 50,000?
It is.
it is.
It is.
So I make a motion that we recommend adoption of the article to appropriate funds for the small repair grant program.
I
I'll
second it.
second.
All right, any discussion?
Can I just ask about the sources? So this in the last article is overlay surplus. I'm just curious the reason for that source of the fund there.
I go back and forth between overlay surplus and free cash since it's associated with assistance. That's why I go overlay surplus, but there's no legal distinction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, coming to a vote. Paul,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Next one is the sewer enterprise fund budget. So Dave, can I ask you on this one, will this need to be amended when we get the MWRA assessment?
Madam Chair, yes, and my recommendation is that we will just take that up in the fall. We'll shore up the budgets because we do know that we'll have to amend the budget anyways in the fall for collective bargaining purposes.
Okay, so there will be no amendment this spring.
That's correct. The budgets will go as presented in the warrant and as
Okay. Okay,
The table doesn't have labels on the, what,
hence why I gave that handout. It will,
Oh.
it will in the
thank you.
next version.
is there a motion?
I move that we recommend adoption of the FY25 sewer enterprise fund budget.
Second,
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will do a roll call vote. Ball,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right, fiscal year 25 water enterprise fund budget.
Consistent with the handout that Dave gave tonight, I recommend that we move to adopt and accept the FY 2025 water enterprise fund budget.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will take a roll call vote. Paul,
Yes.
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right, department revolving fund spending limits. We had asked for information about the amounts collected and expended for each of the revolving funds. Dave provided that information to us. And it does not appear that there are any issues with any of the revolving funds from his spreadsheet.
Was that sent in an email or is that, I guess I haven't seen it.
Madam.
Right here.
This one just,
No, it's.
That's all right. I'll take your
Madam
word for it.
Chair, the copy for Paul and Barry are sitting on the table next to them.
Okay.
I'm in Buenos Aires. Sorry, I can't get to it.
Okay.
So I reviewed the expenditures from 23 and 22, 21 and 20, and these all seem in line. There's been no changes to the limits. I recommend that we adopt the warrant article for the approval of the department revolving fund spending limits.
Second,
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will take a roll call vote. Paul,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes,
and I vote yes. Next item, rescind debt authorization.
I make a motion that we recommend adoption of the article to rescind the debt authorization in the amount of $2.5 million.
I second that.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
Can I ask how this
Mike.
coordinates with the citizens petition?
We intend to ask the citizens petitioners when if they come in to meet with us, whether they want to keep the petition.
Okay.
But my understanding is if the prior warrant article passes, then there would be no need to, or it would just be a confirming vote.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say that, you know, I still have a lot of concerns about this whole process. And, you know, I'm still going to review certain matters and communications with town council. That being said, I am thankful that the select board and town manager supported this rescission. So I very much am in support of the article.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion?
This is my favorite article.
All right, hearing none. I'll come to a roll call vote. Paul,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes, enthusiastically.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Which brings us to, thank you, everyone. Finance Committee updates. Any updates?
The only thing that I wanted to just ask, and I made this request, I think, a couple weeks ago, and I know everyone's swamped, so I'm not trying to throw work on people's plate, but are we still anticipating getting that information with respect to the town clerk? I know it's blank in the draft warrant article, but I think. Can I recognize the town manager?
Yes, I can't see her.
The question is, how are we doing collecting information with respect to salaries for town clerks with the communities with which we usually compare?
I have not done that. I am working on scheduling a personnel board meeting for the next 2 weeks. We did recommend to the personnel board that we tag the position at the same, they haven't got this yet, at the same grade as the department managers in town hall, the treasurer, assessor. So, we think that's an appropriate salary given our comps. Communities are all over the place in terms of responsibilities, so that was our recommendation. I could get it, but I think it's a fair.
So Clerk Eaton said that she might have some data from her association. I'm not saying that should be, you know, determinative of anything. Because as you say, the positions differ from one town to the next,
Yeah.
but, you know, to the extent it's helpful.
I will get it.
Thank you.
I have no other updates or questions.
Okay, anyone else? So Carol and I do. We have 2 candidates for executive secretary to the Finance Committee. Conducted the first interview and will be conducting the second interview soon. So we're very hopeful that we will have an executive secretary on board in the next couple of weeks. And we were hoping, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I kind of am. Catherine, that you would be able to continue doing minutes for us after the start of the new executive secretary, because we anticipate that there will be a little bit of a learning curve when the new person comes on. So, but it's,
I think so.
yeah, it's very good news.
Don't put her on the spot though, man.
I know. And I did.
I think I'll be available.
Thank you.
Speak to your lawyer first.
All right. And I will be putting together, a couple of you have asked me what the schedule will look like going forward for the next few weeks. I will be putting together a schedule. I'm trying to bring in various committees that have who have articles on the warrant. So we'll be bringing as many of those as we can before the deadline for printing the warrant. And that's it.
So we have a meeting next week though, right?
We do. Next week, we are going to have the IT discussion.
Okay.
And then we'll be, looking at various warrant articles based upon who's available and who has sufficient information for us to look at them now.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Paul,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
I vote yes. And thank you for bearing with the Zoom part of the meeting.
Enjoy wherever you are.